Hello, Kim Grant here for our next installment of the MedTech Regional Focus Group on Buffalo and Niagara. And I am thrilled to introduce you to probably one of the hardest working people I've ever had the pleasure to work with. Raf Magar is at AHRM. They are a healthcare economics company serving not just Buffalo and the Western New York region, but the nation and the international locations near and far. And so we're going to find out what AHRM is working on today and where they came from and where they're going. So welcome, Raf.
Great. Thank you, Kim. It's good to be with you here today.
So you've been busy moving your office, expanding and hiring. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on in your world?
Well, we're in the consulting world, and I'll just like to add to the intro, we are also a CRO. And for those who don't know what that means, it's a contract research organization, primarily involved in running clinical trials for registration studies. That would include the FDA and EMEA. But our core focus has been over the years expanding our CRO capabilities to include health economic analyses using real world evidence. And that business has really taken off in the sense that we do studies all over the world. We try to focus in on real world evidence as opposed to simulation modeling because a lot of the decision makers over, I guess, probably the last 4 or 5 years have leaned more towards real world evidence, and to the point where the FDA in about 2018, 2019 actually provided guidance to manufacturers for using real world evidence to provide label updates or changes. So that was very exciting for our business.
Specifically around biotech or med devices in 510K?
All of the above. It's interesting because what's happened is the line between pharmaceutical and device evaluations has really changed. Oftentimes, there's a discussion as to what is being evaluated. In many cases now, we do both. So we do a combination of pharmaceutical as well as device evaluations, whether that be in the clinical trial world or in the economic world. What we've learned over the years that it's very efficient if you're running a clinical trial to also be capturing health economic data at the same time. Why? For a very simple reason. You need someone to pay for it, that is insurance, unless each patient is willing to pay $1 million per treatment. Any company that innovates and does not necessarily have reimbursement through the insurance company, in this case, we're talking about the US, is not likely to succeed. So collecting that information as part of the clinical trial protocol, typically phase 2, phase 3, is a very efficient way to go, so that by the time they get approval, they have their what was referred to as their economic dossier ready for payers. And a lot of payers will not even consider you for reimbursement unless, primarily on the pharma side, but unless you have a dossier that you can provide them and it includes an economic component to it.
It's so smart. So, as recent in our own backyard in Buffalo, we had the Smart Pill, which was capturing pressure, temperature, and pH as the pill traversed the GI system. And brilliant technology really would have done a lot for people with IBS and diagnosing it more quickly. But because they didn't pursue a parallel path of regulatory approval for submitting it to insurance, they ended up getting sold to Covidian years later.
Yeah.
So this is a real thing that needs to happen with anything that's being developed.
Yeah, they did have a good technology. We're actually very familiar with the technology. We did do some of their valid data management validation coming out of the UK. It was a global study. It was unfortunate because not only was the technology effective, but it was relatively inexpensive. And sometimes even the least expensive technology needs to be framed in the context of what the potential value, not only for the payer, but for the patient, and generally to the system is. But that experience has not been lost on us because we have come across very similar technologies. Actually, we're working in that space now where those companies are more open to the idea that an economic evaluation, really to wrap our arms around the data sets for not only the company themselves. I mean, where do we price it? I mean, that's always an ongoing question. How do we price this? You can't just pull it out of thin air. But what can we justify based on outcomes to submit to the insurance companies? And the insurance companies do want this information. I mean, it's not something that is esoteric to them. They don't have the resources or the capabilities to do it internally. So they rely on the pharmaceutical companies or the device companies to provide them with that information. The challenge that we see a lot of times, particularly in the device world, for just basic market authorization, is there's so much, the resources are limited. There's so many other things to be concerned about. Why do I need to deal with an economic study now? I'll deal with it after the fact. Well, I'll tell you what the answer is. You don't have the same kind of window that a pharmaceutical company would have in terms of protection. It's about 3 years. So as soon as you come out with something, you know that there's someone right behind you who's probably got a similar technology and or a better technology. And what we've seen a lot of the device companies do, the ones who have, I think, been in the industry for a long time, is they use the health economics as a strategic tool to get the attention that they need, not only with payers, but also with investors. That's another piece of the equation that a lot of the device companies may not fully appreciate, is that we'll do a lot of economic evaluations to really support a lot of the investment, VC money coming in. We can justify it rather than say, it's a $10 billion market. We can estimate how much of that market based on outcomes they can capture, and therefore what the value of that technology is.
Yeah, let's go down that path. Innovation on the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus is huge. You see it there being at the center of excellence, and we've got our friends at the Jacobs Institute with their I2R, and we have our friends at the Jacobs School of Medicine with UB Rise. And if you can mitigate the risk of an investor by identifying what something could be potentially worth on the market and how to disrupt the standard of care, that's like a crystal ball.
It is, and the on the pharmaceutical side, they spend a lot of money doing that, where they some of the large cap pharmaceutical companies, for example, have set up elite HEOR groups. So HEOR stands for Health Economics and Outcomes Research, and the sole purpose of that group is to provide the decision makers right up to the top unfiltered information of what the value proposition, because those companies want to determine whether I need to spend $50 million on phase 2 or just cut my losses and leave. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I know that for a fact. So that happens quite a bit. In this community, and we've been part of this community since 2008 when we were founded at the COE, we see a lot of innovation, and it's frequently say, oh boy, that could be a really huge, and here's why, because we see not only what goes on in the United States, but we see it globally. And so a lot of what happens in healthcare is driven by practice patterns, not just the technology. It's how people adopt the technology, the need for technology. And I would argue a lot of the technology that comes out of this part of the world has better application other parts of the world, Europe, India, places like that. And so without the knowledge or the appreciation of how big that market is globally, I think there's a lot of missed opportunities, because there does tend to be a very U.S. centric focus, and I think that's fine, because this is a huge market, but there's a lot of opportunities that are missed. And again, I'm going back to my earlier point, in that one of the things that we see lacking is integration of this HEOR, Health Economics and Outcomes Research, as a strategic tool to begin to make informed decisions early on. And the biggest one is, how much can I realistically price my technology at, developing that price band, as opposed to, typically we still don't know how they normally do it. It really comes out of a black box, but it's not supported. I think the last set of numbers I came across published is that 1 in 10 on the pharmaceutical side actually make enough to cover the cost of development, right? So there's a whole bunch of drugs in this case that are developed but don't actually make money. I mean, people don't realize that. I think about every 5,000 entities evaluated, maybe 3 to 5 of them actually make it to market. So there's a huge investment that, to get it to this point, why not maximize it by wrapping an economic story around it? And that's just one piece. The other piece that we've also gotten into um, is the fact that there's the lack of education. So you've got to start informing people how to use the technology. It seems to, constantly stay in our world, but it really needs to get to the clinician, to the patient, and things like that. So that's something else we began to expand on.
Brilliant. That's what attracted me to the Center of Excellence in the first place, was taking a science project and turning it into something that could really be impactful in healthcare outcomes, improving healthcare. You have done, I'm going to pivot a bit. You've done an extraordinary job of assembling the most talented group of people with smarter than smart. Can you talk a little bit about your
Yeah,
team members and their expert your
yeah,
own?
sure. Sure. So my background, I grew up actually right next door, right across the Peace Bridge in Toronto, and have been in the United States for about 25 years between Buffalo, New Jersey, Boston, and now North Carolina, which is one of our locations. Um, I discovered a long time ago that the best way to proceed in this type of work is to have varying backgrounds, technical but varying backgrounds. So we have a combination of biomedical engineers, we have mathematicians, we have psychometricians, we have medical technologists, data scientists, and insurance specialists, all at the PhD level. That when possible, we try to recruit from here. But with COVID, it does, you've got the entire country at your disposal. And so we bring a very strong technical component, but more importantly, we leverage science that's been used elsewhere in other disciplines, like engineering. People who build bridges, they have a lot of mathematical concepts that we apply in our world, which haven't been applied. Why? Because a lot of times when we start, there's a lot of gaps in the data sets. And so how do we address those gaps? We just don't stop. We've got to continue. So that's been very helpful. And I think the most important thing that I've seen here, located at the building behind me in the COE, is that when we need a very specific skill set, we have the community to draw upon. We don't necessarily have the resources to hire them full time, but we can consult with them and then go from there. So that saves us a lot of time. Just pick up the phone or send an email, and within a day or two, we're talking to an expert in the field. That's really, really helpful.
Brilliant. I'm sure that the rest of the audience is thinking to themselves, how early is too early to give AHRM a call?
The earliest we've done it is at the chemical entity stage. That is with the molecule. We'll compare it to other molecules. That's more internal discussion. I wouldn't put a lot of resources. I would say once you get past phase 1 human trials, then we're in a position to probably help guide, not necessarily build a model, but guide as part of the phase 2 protocol. And then, based on those results, we can provide guidance on the phase 3 protocol and ultimately get it to the point where we're collecting real world data, or data as part of your clinical trial, so that you're ready to go. And sometimes, they don't like to talk about this too much, but sometimes we can help you make those decisions based on the data that you already have, which way you want to go. And is the price point that we estimate attractive to you? Not everyone wants to hear that. Decision makers want to hear that, but it's it's helpful. Do you want to spend $50 million and develop a Me Too, or do you want to spend $50 million and have something that you can make a lot of money with? I mean, that's part of the game as well, is to generate the revenue.
Well, on behalf of all the companies that are in the COE and in our region and that are using your services, thank you for all you're doing. And I hope that this webinar and our little discussion here makes your phone ring off the hook, because we're so very lucky to have you in our backyard.
Well, Kim, I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the experience, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about us is to visit our website, and happy to have a dialogue with you with no expectations. I mean, that happens quite a bit. Like I said, we are located at the COE. If you can't reach me there, you can always send me an email, or send an email or a phone call. Our number is also listed on our website. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.